This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. It's Friday. It's noon. We know what you came here to hear. It's time for our weekly news recap where we take you behind the scenes of the week's big state and local stories.
After 9 years of construction, most of the Jane Byrne interchange will reopen this month.
The city council gave its stamp of approval to funding a plan to extend the red line from 95th Street all the way south to 130th.
The Chicago City Council approved the bike lane enforcement ordinance today.
A proposed near Southside High School is getting some new funding. City Council's Finance Committee approved a proposal dedicating $8 million in city money to allow CPS to buy property for the school.
The Bally's Casino project has cleared the final hurdle in Chicago. The city council approved the $1.7 billion facility.
Joining us to help make sense of the week's news is Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, Tina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also here, Jacoby Cochran, the host of CityCast Chicago. That's a daily podcast and newsletter about all things Chicago. Great to have you back.
What's up, Sasha? Thank you for having me.
And Mick Dumke, reporter for ProPublica. Good to see you again, Mick.
Thank you. You as well.
Well, folks, it's a wrap. All right, no, the recap is not over. I'm talking about City Council, of course, holding its last meeting of the year, and they covered a lot of ground this week, so let's dig into what they did. First of all, Chicago's West Side 12th Ward has a new alderperson, Tina, so tell us about Annabelle Abarca.
Annabelle Abarca was the chief of staff to Alderman Cardenas, I believe between 2015 and 2019, so not the most current chief of staff, but this is a person that people went to get things done. He is like a chatty person. There's a part of being a city council person, an alderperson, where you have to do the show, and she was the behind the scenes, let's get things done. So she's pretty well respected. Mm-hmm. I believe there were 3 others that were in contention for this, and she was chosen. He is going to the Cook County Board of Review. So this is a well-respected behind-the-scenes staffer, so she'll get a chance to see if she wants to do this.
Yeah.
And she'll be up for, this is until May, and then, if she wins, she would get a 4-year term.
Yeah, do you think that this gives her a leg up, though, in the February race?
I do. I think it's probably frustrating for people when this happens, though, because the people are not really selecting the person. Mm-hmm. And this is the 4th person that the mayor has chosen, which is a lot. That's a lot.
It's been seasonal. It's been one every single season.
Right.
Coley in the spring, Monique Scott in the summer.
Oh, you mean like actual
in the
seasons?
fall,
yeah.
And now Annabelle Abarca in the winter.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Mick, right? It seems like Mayor Lightfoot is trying to leave her mark on the council. What do you think?
Well, sure. Every mayor wants to do this. And none of the names were surprises. They were all considered the front runner from the beginning, even though this mayor, like the mayors before her, ostensibly has some sort of process for selecting appointees, replacements for aldermen who step away. But just seems like over and over again, it's the people that we all expected.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
All right, well, let's steer the city council conversation over to public transit. A plan to extend the red line got the green light this week. Let's hear what Mayor Lightfoot had to say, followed by 9th Ward Alderman Anthony Beal, who represents the far south side neighborhood of Roseland.
I just want to say congratulations to the far south side. It's a long, long, long time coming.
So this is another opportunity for everybody to right the wrong, to turn the ship around and put it in the right direction to make sure our community gets their fair share.
So give us the details here, Tina.
Sure. This is a huge deal. This is how many mayors have talked about doing this. So this is a big win for the mayor. But, we'll see when this actually happens, if people will actually thank her for it. But it is a big deal. It's a TIF district that they're creating to try to fund a portion of this. It's only 26%, which is so much money. $959 million is only 26% of funding for this program.
Wow.
Or to extend the red line. It's essential. People need to get downtown. It's for, there's so many reasons why this should have happened earlier, and there's so many political games that happen in between. But it looks like this is happening, and they do still need so much federal funding. As I said, I believe it's $3.6 billion.
Yeah.
But they believe that they'll get it.
And the council risked losing a massive amount of federal funding, right, if they hadn't approved this by the end of 2022. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, there was a timeline for it. So they needed to get this done. But most importantly, it would be 4 new stations, 103rd Street, 111th Street, and Eggleston Avenue, Michigan Avenue, near 116th and 130th Street. So you've never seen the train go down that far. It's all buses. all slushing around. And so it's going to make a huge difference. For
Well, I
Chicagoans.
mean, Jacoby, you're a longtime South Sider. How transformative will this extension be? As Tina said, it's a huge deal.
Yeah, I think it's important for access. I mean, I grew up somewhere off of the 87th, stopped my entire life anywhere between like Sangamon and Stony Island. And people for even beyond my time here have been talking about extending this. So the idea of like congratulations to the far South Side, I mean, you know, for 50 years, you've like dangled this carrot in front of generations of people as these communities have seen like rapid disinvestment. And so putting the train here needs to be a first step to revitalizing the communities that will live off of this red line. So again, a win for the mayor. We got to call it what it is, you know, to be the person responsible for it, kind of getting this part through is huge. But, you know, February around the corner, and this is going to be a long process, so you might not be able to see it through. So let's not, you know, go cutting ribbons just yet.
Well, that said, Tina, I mean, does the mayor's red line plan face pushback?
Anthony Beale, there were some aldermen, women, persons who
said no.
Who said, Alderman Pat Dahl said, why are we taking this money from one area to fund another? And there was criticism over how we funded the North Side revitalization for the CTA. So, yeah, there's a lot of dissent in there, but I think ultimately people will see the value of all these people being able to get on a train.
Yeah, they think, you know, the opposition wasn't about the idea of extending the red line, which appears to have universal support, the concept. But of course, the issue is always, where's the money going to come from?
Right.
And you mentioned the federal funds. You know, the federal deal didn't require the city council to approve a new TIF district, but the city doesn't seem to have any other way or ideas for coming up with that money. And it's kind of weird because it's going to basically, the TIF district isn't anywhere near the area that would get the construction. So that's why, you know, Alderperson Dowell was opposed to it. She said she represents much of the area. I think it's from Madison down to about 39th Street, where the TIF district would run. She represents much of that area and basically says, we need the tax money. We need investment in our neighborhood. And so it doesn't seem fair to take it from here and move it somewhere else.
Well, before we move on, Tina, any idea when this massive project would actually be done?
Years.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to
shovels
see
in the
it
ground
next
in like
week.
2025, I think.
No. And I mean, federal funding is a slow process as well.
True.
But this is an assurance that we should be getting it, which is a good sign.
All right. Well, on to the proposed casino for Chicago's River West neighborhood. And I'm looking at you, Mick. It's now another step closer to reality after the City Council Zoning Committee approved this plan. So give us an update on this casino plan.
Yeah, so the casino, the proposed casino by Bally's would go in at what used to be the Tribune's very pretentiously named Freedom Center, essentially their printing plant right over on the Chicago River, just northwest of downtown. And the latest thing was an approval for the zoning. The last step, I believe, the big step is that's left is to get a license from the state, from the Illinois Gaming Board.
Right, because it's not quite a done deal.
So it's not quite a done deal yet.
Done.
And you know what's interesting about this is this whole process has been really sped up. It's you know, from the beginning, even some people in the city council who are in favor of the idea of a casino, people who are even in favor of this location have been concerned about the process. Parts of the evaluation that you know, the mayor had done were basically done in secret. We still don't know a whole lot about why this particular proposal was chosen, some of the details. The site has been controversial, but it basically got momentum after Alderman Walter Burnett, whose ward, 27th Ward, includes the specific site, has come out in favor of it. And most recently saying that, you know, he got some assurances about hiring for people of color.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines on the weekly news recap with Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times, Mick Dumke of ProPublica, and Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago. Remember that you can now watch us on this weekly news recap. We are live right now on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also check out the video live stream on Reset's Facebook page. So sticking with City Council, gang, Southside High School got aldermanic approval for an additional $8 million in TIF funds. There's quite a bit of controversy surrounding the school, though, isn't there, Mick?
Yeah, this is really a fascinating story that touches on a lot of different issues. The supporters of this proposal for this new high school argue, and that, the aforementioned Alderwoman Dowell, being one of the leading proponents of it, says this is really going to be a great thing for the near South Side. It's projected to have a very diverse student body. But the critics have said from the beginning, really this is being built for a specific community. That's the growing South Loop neighborhood, which is predominantly white. And it initially had some funding from the state that was engineered by Representative Teresa Ma from Chinatown. Mm-hmm. And she presented wanted the funding for a high school that will serve her community. But now she has said she's going to put a hold on this money because she doesn't like the site, which happens to be on land where Chicago Housing Authority's Ickes Homes once stood, and where the CHA has been, as in most of its other sites, way behind in promised housing construction. So this managed to excite a lot of different people and also really irk a lot of different people at the same time.
Well, anyone here surprised that the alderman approved funding for this school, given the criticism?
No. I think the process right now in our city, whether you look at South Shore and the Obama Presidential Center, whether you look at the NASCAR deal that will be hitting the streets next summer, if you look at Bally's, or even the high school, the alder people, the mayor, they want to put their name on development. They want to put their name on supposedly, making historical change, extending the red line, finally bringing a high school to the neighborhood. But each time it seems to come at the cost of community engagement, transparency. In this rushed process is, I think, ultimately just going to leave a sour taste in people's mouth, and the people who are voting for this may not, gain the support for their community to be here to see some of these things through.
Well, this leads us right into our next story. This is one that you just published today, Mick, in ProPublica. It's involving the Chicago Housing Authority and a major promise that it made around a public housing makeover. Talk about that.
That's right. 22 years ago in 2000, the year 2000, the CHA officially launched what it called the Plan for Transformation. Most people who've been in Chicago for some time know what happened afterward. The CHA demolished tens of thousands of units of housing around the city and promised to rebuild or rehab 25,000 units to replace that old, what they described as old, decrepit public housing with mixed income communities that consisted of 25,000 new and rehabbed units. What I found in this story we just published this morning was that very quietly, the CHA told the federal government earlier this year that it's done with the 25,000 units. And when I mentioned that to a number of people, office holders, housing advocates, CHA residents, the response literally was the same for most people. Well, where are the units? Mm-hmm. Some of that is to the CHA's credit. They have built a number of units, and they have, in some cases, sprinkled them in areas around the city so they're not as segregated as they were before. But what my story is about is really how they've padded these numbers, and they've kind of thrown apples and oranges together in the same basket and really remain very far behind not just their promises, but legal commitments to rebuild housing at a lot of their former sites.
Interesting. Well, let's finish up our city council roundup, Jacoby. A new ordinance was approved to make Chicago's bike lanes safer. Mm-hmm. What's this about? It
was introduced by Alderman Andre Vasquez in the 40th Ward that covers parts of Lincoln Square and Edgewater. And essentially it takes the $150 fines and ups it to $250 fines for blocking the bike lanes, even if a collision doesn't happen. It gives more city departments the ability to initiate a tow, as well as allowing the Chicago Department of Transportation to revoke the service permit. And for me, when I hear about increased fines, I appreciate the initiative. We just had some cycling advocates, pedestrian advocates on the show from Better Street Chicago.
Okay.
And they explain that, anything at the end of the day that is dictated by a fine ultimately becomes a law about convenience. Because $250 to us is something completely different from other people.
Yeah.
And the culture that we have in our city right now around pedestrians and cyclists is that they come last, right?
Yeah.
We had you all's colleague here at WBEZ, Taylor Faye Nazon, on our show earlier today, and she talked about cycling through her neighborhood and somebody just openly, or just opening their door callously and then telling her, watch where you're going.
Yeah.
Right? And so, what those advocates were essentially saying is we have to go beyond punitive fines. We have to start really imagining what this city can look like if we take bike safety seriously. So when we're thinking about these major development projects, Matt Martin in the 47th, is proposing that we have to build into these new developments increased bike safety. We got 280 miles of bike lanes across Chicago, and I think 40 miles are protected by curbs and some type of plastic barrier. And we have to have a comprehensive plan across wards. Bike safety from one community to the next changes drastically. So this can't be alder person to alder person. It has to be city and statewide.
And we can only hope that these stiffer penalties do serve as a reminder to drivers to just be aware there are bicyclists on the road. And I say that as a driver, right? So shout out to the folks on YouTube watching us right now. Dale Shytown said, the red line extension is great news. Also, another comment from D-Farm who says, please talk about the NASCAR deal again. The reported terms of the deal are horrible for the city. Jacoby, did you talk about this on CityCast too?
Yeah, this was another thing that Taylor brought up on the show earlier, and it's that, people still have concerns that, the fees that NASCAR are paying seem relatively low compared to other things that will be in downtown around this time, like Lollapalooza. We still don't have a complete understanding of who's on the hook for security and what cleanup will look like after. And, again, this was another deal that seemed to kind of, at least for us, pop up out of nowhere and seemed to quickly go from an idea to being finalized. And, 3 years with an option for 2 more, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, right? My brother plays Need for Speed. Like, in the most recent game is kind of based off Chicago's downtown. And it looks cool to see Fast and the Furious moving through Columbus Drive. But as my amazing lead producer, Carrie Shepard, said this morning, we don't live in a video game. We don't live in theory. And so, again, when you're doing something like this, really investigating what the community needs and wants is important, because I'm going to be real, at least where I live in Chicago, I ain't seen a lot of people capping for NASCAR. So, where did that momentum really come from?
Yeah.
Well, and Jacoby, I think you touch on something else here, which is just the terms of the deal and where they came from. We see this over and over again with other deals that have nothing to do with NASCAR. The CHA, obviously one of my favorite topics, getting ready to lease long-term lease of land on the near west side to the Chicago Fire soccer team.
Yeah.
How did they come up with the proposals for that? The casino deal. Do these numbers come out of thin air? What is the process for determining, making sure that the public is getting a fair value when they do enter into these kind of deals?
Well, you think about the DNC too, which we're still in consideration. Like, those are terms that we don't know either. What are we getting? We'll know after it's over.
That's right.
Which is how it works.
And our friend D-Farm on YouTube says, but who can afford tickets?
What, $280+ then like $460 for reserve seatings.
Wild. I won't be there. All right, that is Mick Dumke, reporter for ProPublica, Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago, and Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times. They are sticking around, and we hope that you will too, because there is much more news to get to on the other side of this quick check-in with Susie-Ann.
Hey there, Sasha. Yep, drivers in the U.S., Europe, and elsewhere are getting a break from the record high pump prices that they endured over the summer, but that price tag is still difficult for many customers who've been struggling with relentless inflation and have been used to lower prices. And heading into the winter, a number of conditions are straining oil supply, which could end up pushing prices for oil and gasoline higher. Among them are restrictions on who can buy Russian oil and a price cap of $60 per barrel on Russia's crude because of the war in Ukraine. And German police say a huge aquarium in the center of Berlin burst and caused a wave of devastation in and around the popular tourist attraction. Berlin's fire service said 2 people were slightly injured. There was speculation freezing temperatures had caused a crack. Berlin officials say most of the 1,500 fish it held couldn't be saved. This is WBEZ News.
The late Manuel Gottschalk changed the course of electronic music with an hour-long improvisation in 1981.
He really wasn't interested in music that looked to the past. He wanted to do something new.
I'm Ari Shapiro. How one experimental German musician became known in dance clubs around the world, this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
That's today at 3 o'clock on 91.5 WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by Pfizer and BioNTech and by BMO Harris Bank. The BMO for Black and Latinx Businesses Empowering Small Business program offers additional access to funds, educational resources, and networking. More at bmoharris.com/Black and Latinx. This is WBEZ.
Back now with more Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. And if you're just tuning in, it's our weekly news recap where we make sense of the week's top local and state stories. Now, before the break, we talked about all that took place at City Council this week, but there's much more to get to.
A Cook County jury siding with a Chicago police detective who claimed he was demoted after he refused to change the result of an investigation.
Candidates at a mayoral forum on the Northwest Side tonight went after Congressman Chuy Garcia.
A newly released poll shows that Garcia is emerging as the clear front-runner.
But while Garcia's campaign is basking in the poll, he is also facing scrutiny over political donations.
The mayoral campaigns of both Willie Wilson and Jamal Green traded barbs at today's ballot challenge hearings.
Our panel today, Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, Jacoby Cochran, host of CityCast Chicago, a daily podcast and newsletter, and Mick Dumke, who's a reporter for ProPublica. All right, Tina, we've been hearing a lot of national coverage about the fall of SBF. That's crypto king Sam Bankman-Fried. Chicago's got its own ties, though, to this crypto collapse. So let's start with mayoral candidate Congressman Chuy Garcia. What's his connection?
Okay, so as you know, Bankman-Fried is accused. He's charged in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, and he's also charged by regulators of wire fraud, misusing money from this cryptocurrency thing to funnel it into a hedge fund. Arrested in Bahamas. There's going to be a movie for sure. We need to see this. But basically what we're seeing is a trickling down of where did he use this money. And he had contributed to different campaigns. So there's a $200,000 independent expenditure committee contribution that benefited Chuy Garcia earlier this year prior to the general election.
I see.
So that is the question. With independent expenditure committees, there's so many things that we need to learn of the process of how people are able to do this. But basically, he also gave Chuy Garcia an individual contribution, and he has returned that. That's how it goes, especially in Chicago. If you have ties to something shady, you give the money away. So he already did that. But there's more questions about why did this guy choose to support Chuy in the primary when he was running unopposed.
Very interesting.
So there's a million stories about this, but it's very interesting to see where the money went, why he did what he did. There's some journalism organizations in this. So it's very interesting to see. Everyone will be following this money and his intentions, but this guy seems to be in big trouble.
Well, Mick and Jacoby, how harmful is this to Garcia's mayoral bid?
I think a lot of people have...
It's Chicago.
Right. By the time you get to the end of the coverage, people are saying, oh, it feels like the Chicago way in some respects. And I think he'll probably be able to separate him because if we start looking at some of the other front runners, donors, Mick just pointed out earlier, that pushing through of the soccer training facility, the billionaire owner has donated to Lightfoot's campaigns at some point throughout her tenure. And so is she going to have to, live that contribution down? And if we start going through other people's, financial records, we might not find things we like. So I think eventually people will forget about it. There are 11 candidates. It's not going to stick.
It's also so hard to explain cryptocurrency. Try to explain that to your mom, and she's like, "What are you talking about?"
I still don't get it.
Yeah,
that's why you guys are here. Well, there's a new poll though, Tina, that's showing Congressman Garcia actually leading in the mayoral race, right?
Yes, it's a poll commissioned by Local 150, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But it is good when it's reported where you say where it came from. I think that's essential. So clearly they have some say in this. But he is up by 7 points in this poll. And they also showed some favorable numbers if he were to be in a runoff with Lori Lightfoot. Their people say this was taken the day that he announced his candidacy with all these glowing stories. So they're kind of downplaying it. They're saying it's early. They're also saying, hey, remember Lori Lightfoot had like no support in the last polls before she won. I remember talking to her the Sunday before the election, and she was very casual and jokey, telling me about her favorite Clash song. Like you would never know that that's what would happen. So I think, that it's very early and you can't totally bank on these numbers.
Yeah, and the congressman was not at Tuesday's Northwest Side mayoral debate as well. Did his crypto campaign donation, you think, have anything to do with his decision to not attend?
I think she's in a position when you're an incumbent to say, hey, I'm busy, I'm running city council meetings, I'm doing things.
Yeah, because you're talking about Mayor Lightfoot also wasn't there.
Yes,
so they
Mayor
both
Lightfoot.
weren't there.
Yes.
To be fair.
So they're kind of acting like the front runners. Like, they're picking and choosing. What do we have to do?
What do you think, Mick? Do you think we're going to hear a lot more about this crypto drama leading up to February?
I doubt it, unless a lot more unfolds tied to it. If there's more money, if something comes out where, there was some sort of more clear pay-to-play arrangement or the appearance of one, maybe it could get a little legs. But I agree with Jacoby. I think there's so many other issues people are worked up about. That forum you're just talking about, it sounds like crime was the biggest issue on candidates' minds for sure. And that's what I hear from a lot of voters. Crime, economic development, some of the issues I already talked about, traffic safety. I think it's going to be a lot more things that really people are dealing with day to day. And usually campaign contributions is way down the list unless there's something really onerous about it or ugly about it.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines on the weekly news recap with Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times, Mick Dumke of ProPublica, and Jacoby Cochran of the CityCast Chicago podcast. We're also online, so if you're online, meet us there. We are at WBEZ's Facebook page. Jacoby's got a great sweater, and so does Tina, so does Mick.
Sitting here comfy.
We're on YouTube. You can watch this recap, too. All right, so this feud between mayoral candidates Jamal Green and Willie Wilson, this continues with Green now calling for a federal investigation into Wilson's consultant, who's former state senator Ricky Hendon, who Green alleges tried to bribe one of his campaign aides.
There needs to be a federal investigation into Ricky Hendon and Willie Wilson, especially knowing that Willie Wilson is not going to fire him, and Willie Wilson has paid him almost $500,000 in the last 4 years alone. $500,000 almost. We have the records. And so this is his henchman that he uses to buy people off, and we're exposing it.
What's the latest on this story, Tina?
Henchman. Strong word.
Strong.
So, there is a process to get on the ballot. You have to get a required number of signatures, 12,500. This is a normal part of the process. Everyone can do this. People can challenge it. You can hire a lawyer. So this is just how the system works. But it does seem to be like there are some grudges here, as you just heard. So Willie Wilson's ally, Ricky Hendon, who was a former state senator, so he helped to get Jamal off the ballot the last time he ran. And so here we go. He has the right to do this as well. He's a right to accuse and to go through the process and to see if the signatures are valid. But he is accusing him of more than that. He seems he wants to have a federal investigation. I'm not sure if this will happen. I don't know if this is beneficial for him, but it is a good kind of way for voters to understand how this stuff works.
Yeah, what do we think, folks? Stopped. What are the chances that there will actually be a federal investigation into this? Mick, you're smiling.
Well, the chances are zero that it will happen as a result of a political candidate demanding one. But, if there ends up being more smoke that leads to some kind of fire, perhaps. I mean, there's nothing wrong or illegal. You could debate whether it's wrong or not. There's nothing illegal about Ricky Hendon getting paid to serve as Willie Wilson's campaign consultant or advisor. And to say we have the records, well, we all have the records. Those are publicly available on the Illinois State Board of Elections. But Ricky Hendon, a very colorful character. He's been around for a long time. Tina mentioned his time in the state Senate. He's advised other political candidates before. He's I believe in various cannabis enterprises. I mean, he is he's someone who seems to be never far from the issues we're talking about on your show.
All right, so we are done talking about the mayor's race for now. But there are some lesser known races that are also on this February 28th ballot. Let's take a look at the city's first ever police district councils. Jacoby, fill us in there.
So we've got about 122 candidates looking to fill 66 vacancies on Chicago's new police district councils. Each district council of the 22 in the city will have 3 people elected. I believe not every single district has 3 people running.
Like who's eligible to run for one of these councils?
I believe you have to live in the neighborhood for a certain amount of time. You can't have any ties in the last few years to Chicago Police, to COPA, to other oversight bodies. But the type of people who, we sat down with Jim Daly from the Chicago Reader, and he really broke it down for us. The type of people are running kind of run the gambit, from teachers to people who are currently in politics to people who've been handpicked by police in their districts. And I think a report came out this week that we're starting to see these 2 camps form on both sides, right? And on one side, you have people who support abolitionist policies, who support defunding police, who fund alternative programs, and then other people who staunchly believe that police are under attack. The truth is, I'm not shocked by this at all. In fact, I'm actually impressed by it. That over the last few years, the abolitionist movement in our city has gotten so strong, so supported, has organized with such veracity that they now stand at the point where news media organizations in our city say that they are on one side against another side that strongly supports police.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's more to be done because I would like to think, I understand that defund the police has become such a charged term, but isn't that not what we want in our society, to not need police as much, to not have to be, have public safety be looked at in this punitive way? Is that not the desired end goal for our society, that we don't need this type of oversight, this type of state violence? But I also understand that throughout most of our lifetime, by that I mean all of our lifetime, police is what we know.
Yeah.
That is where the public safety conversation starts and stops. And so I'm interested to see how it evolves moving forward.
Yeah, so if someone has a complaint about an officer, would they go to this council in the future?
There are a few oversight bodies, and right now it is not very clear if the police district councils will be the number one interface if you have a complaint, but they will be required to hold these monthly public meetings that you can go to, where essentially when you give comment, you can bring up complaints, and then they will report back to the police commission, who ultimately then has its own responsibilities in relation to the other, 10 or 11 so-called oversight bodies throughout our city.
Well, Jacoby, let's stick with police accountability for just another moment. A jury is awarded a former Chicago police detective $910,000. What are the details of Isaac Lambert's lawsuit against the city and CPD?
Yeah, Isaac Lambert argued that he was demoted and I believe ultimately fired because he chose not to participate in what he says was a cover-up of a police officer shooting and injuring an unarmed young man living with autism. And as records started to come out, as videos started to come out, the original story that were being told by police didn't match up. And so Lambert ultimately says that he was in many ways blackballed. Now, I understand that people may not be willing to hear one person's account, but let's be real. This is not new. This sort of code of silence that exists inside of law enforcement, which again comes back to why increased scrutiny, accountability, having people inside the community make, have informed decision-making power over the police is so important. Because we know, and as Jim Daly said when I last spoke to him, arguably the biggest thing standing in the face of, police reform, and I use air quotes there, is this code of silence, is police officers inside of the department knowing that speaking out, that being a whistleblower is ultimately likely to cost you your position and your rank. And I can't imagine that is a conducive space for, openly calling out people's, negligent and violent behaviors.
Yeah. Well, Mick, another quick story here involving police accountability calls for a review of how CPD handled an investigation into an officer's alleged involvement with the right-wing Proud Boys.
That's right. Officer Robert Baker, who was found to have essentially been flirting with the Proud Boys. He said he was never a member, but I think he attended an event. He was engaging with this group. And I think most importantly for this story, honestly, when he was confronted about it by authorities, he lied about it. He gave shifting accounts. And yet at the end of the process, I think there was a mediation that ended up resolving it at the end, but he ended up with 120-day suspension. And so you have a number of people, including Alderman Byron Sigjo Lopez, who are saying, this is just unacceptable. We cannot have people on the force, first of all, associating with right-wing white supremacist groups, clearly, but then to go ahead and lie about it, that just makes it all that much worse.
Jacoby, your thoughts on whether this case raises bigger issues?
Yes. I mean, something I learned growing up in a black household was that the reason the Ku Klux Klan wore masks is not just because it was a symbol. It was because it hid the face of politicians and lawmakers and people who sat on the city council in states and cities across America and police officers. And so what we're seeing now is a legacy of white supremacy existing inside police. Some would argue that the lineage of policing in America is one that follows the white supremacist route back. And so I'm not shocked. And I'm very much disgusted by this attempt to just kind of push it off and blow it off. People didn't storm the Capitol simply because they had the power and the willpower to do it. No, it's because people stepped out the way in some cases.
And they're blaming other people by saying that they're not a hate group, as identified by the FBI, which is kind of an interesting / scary dynamic there. Just putting it on the FBI to be like, hey, classify these people and we'll investigate this differently. But pretty much, having a Proud Boy cop in CPD is not something that I think people want to see.
Yeah. Of course not. Yeah. One last law enforcement story. The Cook County State's Attorney's conviction integrity chief is being accused of the kind of misconduct she's supposed to be keeping an eye on. Mick, first, explain what the conviction integrity chief's job actually is.
Yeah, this is a crazy story and really well put together by your colleague, Chip Mitchell. Got to give a shout out to him. But I think, first of all, the backdrop to this story, if we're going to understand what's going on, is that for years, Cook County was known as the wrongful conviction capital of the United States. And so by the time you had Kim Foxx get elected, she's in her second term now, one of her key promises as she was elected as a progressive reformer coming into the prosecutor's office, one of her key promises was to not only end the practice of these shoddy prosecutions and convictions, but to review a number of these old cases that have been in the system for so long and people have been locked up. So the Conviction Integrity Unit, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to look at these old cases. What Chip has reported on is that the head of the Conviction Integrity Unit currently with the state's attorney's office herself is embroiled in a very messy, complicated series of cases that stem from the murder of a Chicago police officer, Clifton Lewis, more than 10 years ago. A number of people who have been implicated in this horrific crime are challenging their convictions and basically saying they're not the right people, and CPD engaged in a shoddy investigation and whatnot. Where this ties back to the state's attorney's office and the Conviction Integrity Unit is that the head of that was one of the prosecutors in at least one of these cases, maybe a couple of the cases, and there were questions about whether they disclosed all of the evidence that was collected to the defense. So this gets into raises a lot of legal issues. It can get into the weeds pretty fast, but the bottom line is that in order to have faith that not only ongoing convictions are sound, but that the review of past convictions are sound, there needs to be someone with some distance from those cases initially, and that's not what's going on now. And
quick update from you, Tina, because in Springfield, they're dealing with the assault weapons ban this week, right?
Right. So there were 2 hearings this week. They're all in Chicago. There was one on Monday and one yesterday. There's another one on Tuesday. It's just an opportunity for legislators to hear testimony. It was 4 hours yesterday. It was very long. But there was only one pro-gun person, a couple of someone who questioned the constitutionality of it, and then also someone who just said they did not believe an assault weapons ban would have prevented something like the Highland Park shooting, the massacre, and he was also there. So it was interesting to hear this perspective. He was questioned by a Democratic legislator in a back and forth, and the Republican leader-elect said, we got to hear these voices. We got to hear this dissent. So it was a little bit of a flicker of dissent that we're going to see as Democrats try to pass this in January.
Yeah. That's Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. We've got ProPublica reporter Mick Dumke and Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago. They're sticking around, and we hope that you will too, because there's still more news. Can you believe it? But first, we'll check back in with Susie.
Hey, Sasha. Yeah, we've got some light snow falling across the area, and we are seeing a gradual drop in the temperatures. Right now, 29 degrees, headed down to a low tonight around 25. More resets still to come on 91.5 WBEZ.
On the next Science Friday, experimental cancer therapy shows success in more than 70% of the patients. Plus, with the exciting news of a nuclear fusion breakthrough, how much closer are we really to fusion energy? And the best sci-fi video games of 2022, while there's still time to shop for them. All on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago. The news you've needed this year, the news you'll need next. It's here largely because listeners give. It's time for you to step up and do your part. Please give what you can at WBEZ.org/donate.
WBEZ is supported by Green Attic Insulation, specializing in insulation, air sealing, and attic ventilation that helps homeowners improve indoor temperature control. Learn more about booking and inspection at greenattic.com. And by Midwest Young Artists Conservatory with the Journey to 30 celebration concert. More than 200 students perform orchestra, jazz, and choral works December 27th. Tickets at mya.org. This is WBEZ.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, it's our weekly news recap where we make sense of the top local and state stories from recent days. Before the break, we were talking about the mayor's race, and we also took a deep dive into some police accountability issues. Still with us, Tina Sfondeles, Mick Dumke, and Jacoby Cochran. Over to you, Jacoby. Non-tenured faculty at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, they voted to unionize. Also, workers at 6 area Starbucks, they're going on strike today. Mm-hmm. So the union movement, it just seems like it keeps growing.
Yeah, it seems that we're in a really interesting place because for generations we've watched as labor unions have been stripped of power, have been intimidated out of collective bargaining. And I think Chicago deserves an extra amount of praise because I think this momentum stems from the collective action we've seen in uprisings in years past, whether it was after the murder of Laquan McDonald, if it was the uprisings of 2020. I think we as a society are realizing that we are stronger together. And so they voted overwhelmingly, 377 to 33 in favor of joining the union. And, Starbucks around the country have been organizing. They had a huge march in November, and the march that started, or the strikes that started today across the country, is just an additional solidarity move. I think Starbucks has been brought up on something like 900 violations of federal labor laws. And they have, been alleged to intimidate workers out of forming unions, sending high-level executives to local Starbucks to have non-union meetings. And then ultimately we saw Starbucks in Edgewater, after deciding to unionize, being closed. And I said something earlier today on the show that for a symbol as strong as Starbucks, something that in Chicago we joke about, that if a Starbucks pops up in your community, gentrification might not be far behind it. For something to hold that much power in our collective language, it needs to be held accountable. And so whether we're talking about non-tenure track teachers coming together at the Art Institute. We just saw a few weeks ago, City College adjuncts avoid going on strike. But again, by using that collective organizing, I know that people are constantly hearing anti-union messages. Oh, it can raise taxes here. Oh, CTU might go on strike and our kids will be out of school. I get it. But that doesn't mean that, where people feel as if they are not getting what they need or they're not being dignified, whether that's a school or whether that's El Milagro workers in Little Village, they deserve the right to organize with one another for better wages, for better conditions.
I want to turn to a sad story with you, Jacoby. That's a homeless man named Joseph Cormelis, commonly known to Chicagoans as the Walking Man. He was often seen walking around downtown, but he died this week. For those who aren't familiar with his story, though, can you just remind us who the Walking Man was and how his life came to an end?
He was a figure in Chicago almost as common as the State Street Preacher, right? People remember seeing his mustache.
State Street Preacher.
Come on, Buddy done told everybody that they not getting into the pearly gates.
all in
At
trouble.
one point, have you been down there?
If it's not your drinking, it's your foul mouth.
Right? So Cromella's was not as antagonizing a figure, but someone that people, said, they could remember fondly. And unfortunately, he had been the victim of an attack where he was beaten by somebody wielding a bat a few years ago. Then earlier this year, a man doused him in gasoline and set him on fire.
And he had been hospitalized ever since.
And that individual was charged with arson and attempted murder. I imagine after a coroner's report, after an investigation is done, that those charges may change. But I mean, it's been a disgusting story that we've been following all year, and it's extremely heartbreaking because it's a reminder that in our society there is a strong contingency of people who don't believe that the unhoused deserve to live in respect and dignity, that people who are maneuvering through precarity and disinvestment or mental health struggles, that they don't deserve to be heard, they don't deserve to be seen. If we invested more money in, making sure that the unhoused had somewhere to go, that people who had struggles had someone to talk to and where to go. I'm not putting this, all on the city because an individual made the choice to commit, that horrific act. But if we took better care of each other, he might not have been sleeping out there that night.
Yeah, we should also remember this tragic story is not at all isolated to Chicago, right? We've got other American cities that have also experienced violence against the homeless. In March, a man targeted and killed several homeless people in New York City, as well as in Washington, D.C. So, I mean, this is a problem everywhere that really just needs to end. I do want to turn to news about a person who is doing something to help the homeless, though. Over the last year, Andy Robledo, he's been handing out these free orange tents to homeless people, but he was running into some problems with the city. We had him on the program here as well. Share the details with us, Mick.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the city was putting notices around some of these encampments, and everybody who lives here has seen them. They're all over the city. They've exploded. I mean, the backdrop of the Walking Man tragedy, that just act of cruelty, is just simply the fact that there are more people living on the streets. I don't know about all of you, but I've just never seen homelessness in Chicago this visible before. Just walking even downtown during rush hour, you see people sleeping in doorways. So, and yes, it's not unique to Chicago, but it's happening right before our eyes. And Andy has come down pretty hard on the city. He's essentially issued a challenge to them. He said that the city could solve the problem here with the snap of a finger. I'm myself not sure it's quite that simple, but his point is well made, that where there's a will, there's a way. So he didn't feel that the city has taken enough action on this. And he also was alluding to the aforementioned Chicago Housing Authority. They're sitting on a number of empty units. They haven't built the housing that they promised. And so his basically way to challenge them was not just to complain about it and criticize, but to start buying tents and passing them out to people. So
these ice fishing tents that are better
yeah,
suited
exactly.
for the cold.
Where people can actually, I'm not saying it's comfortable during the winter, but it's a lot better than being exposed to the open elements, right?
I also hope the homeless shelters are prepared to receive more people, especially in the coming days. Right?
Our producer, Simone Alisea, went out to Humboldt Park last Saturday and met up Robledo while volunteers were out there constructing the tents. And we're going to be covering that on Monday on CityCast Chicago.
Right.
So people can check in to WBEZ to hear his story, and also, maybe come over to a little CCC, 15 minutes and hear about it.
CCC. I love that. Why have I never thought of that before?
That's because it's City Colleges of Chicago, so it's already
taken.
taken.
True. That's true. It's taken. We can only use that here on the weekly news recap. So, all right, switching gears. He's a self-proclaimed free speech warrior, but Elon Musk is coming under a lot of fire. He's suspending several journalists. That's all I was seeing on my Twitter feed last night. I don't know about you, but he's suspending a lot of journalists from Twitter. What do you guys think about this?
Some of my reporter friends were like, okay, this is the end, right? What do we do?
Like, can we say anything at this point?
Can we say anything? Do we jump ship? What do we do? People are already, joining other social media accounts, Mastodon, a bunch of other ones. So it is scary. I did read this morning that he did do some sort of Twitter chat with some reporters, and they asked him a bunch of questions, and he was unable to answer any of the questions and hopped off. So he's not really explaining his behavior of why he suspended these accounts.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he was on a Twitter Spaces, and I think a couple of people have they recorded the Twitter Spaces, and I think that's all that's left because it's suddenly disappeared off of the Twitter sphere.
Yeah,
What do you think?
No one's shocked. I mean, a person who is out for that much power, dog whistling about wanting to control Twitter so that they can have free speech and they can protect free speech is the kind of person who probably is going to infringe and ultimately restrict other people's free speech, because this entire cancel culture rhetoric honestly is mostly being mobilized by people who don't want to be held accountable for the things that they say and the things they promote, and flies in the face of people who have had to just sit back for generations on generations and take what's being said to them. People in the trans community, right? Journalists, you know, black and brown organizers, women. And so to see Elon Musk try to be the champion of free speech, it rings false right on its face, and his actions just kind of keep showing it.
Yeah, and the irony after Twitter supposedly released all this supposed evidence about how under the previous regime, Twitter was biased against Trump and the Republicans and all this. There's been, all kinds of what appears to me pseudo reporting about this information, basically trying to perpetrate a narrative that under the previous leadership, Twitter was biased against people on the right. And then he comes out and starts to ban knockoff journalists who, hopefully not literally knocking them off, but knocking them off Twitter, who have dared to ask questions and point out discrepancies in this logic.
How dare we? We were having discussion this morning in our team meeting here at WBEZ about journalists not ditching their handles, like keeping your handles and making sure that those handles can't be scooped up by trolls and later get verified. Anybody else having thoughts about that? I haven't jumped to Mastodon. I haven't created an account yet.
I haven't yet. I'm thinking about it. I did take a picture of my blue check mark just in case that goes away to have it as my background photo.
I do know a journalist that I used to work with in Toronto, and she was posting earlier this week about her check mark having turned to orange. She's a business now. So
Interesting.
She's like, I don't know what happened there.
They have
I just host a show. I don't know.
Mine says I'm a legacy verified account. So prior to the Elon days, we're called the legacy accounts.
We'll have to leave it there for the weekly news recap. My thanks to Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, ProPublica reporter Mick Dumke, and Jacoby Cochran, host of CityCast Chicago, a daily podcast and newsletter. We appreciate you guys taking the time to join us, braving the cold.
Check on your so-called strong friends, y'all. Everybody needs somebody to check in on them, all right?
Yes.
Make sure, not only because it's cold outside, but you never know what people are going through, all right? Just pick
Love
up the
that
phone,
message.
send a
Tough
message,
times.
say
Yeah,
something.
thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy your weekend, folks. That is it for Reset. This show is produced by Meha Ahmed, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, Andrea Guffman, Andrew Merriweather, and Sarah Stark. And special thanks to Mohammed Ahmed for his production help this week. Dan Tucker is our executive producer. Ethan Schwab and Dave Miska were our engineers. On Monday, we have got a 1-hour show for you. That's because at noon, the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Yeah, they're holding another public meeting. Yeah, we're going to bring you live coverage. I'm Sasha.